really, a lot of the times the experiences that people want or associate with a lot of money, like owning a private jet or a private island, it really doesn't cost as much as people think it does to do those things. And so it's so important to go out there and just start writing down what your dream life really looks like. Like, what do you really want to do? And then find a way to do it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ego Lab podcast. I'm Brian.
I'm Tony.
All right, today the topics we're covering are our culture's complicated relationship with money and wealth, how much money do you need to be happy, and plenty of other exciting topics.
Let's jump right into this. Money has a direct correlation to options. So why do people care so much about money or being wealthy?
Our ancestor monkey tribes used to operate with a hierarchy. So as time's gone on, that's kind of where the priority has been, is getting to the top of the hierarchy and using that money as a status or a symbol to prove maybe that, you're someone of importance.
So you brought up a couple main points here, which was kind of status, hierarchy, importance. How do people know if they're high status or high importance? How do you measure status?
A few different ways. There's one which is virtue signaling, like I'm somebody who does a lot of volunteering, I'm somebody who does a lot of good, I'm somebody who is really committed to recycling, and I demonstrate that in an outward way, and that makes me feel like I'm a really good person. And then there's the other way, which is a little bit more obvious. If you're someone who drives a really expensive car, that's a very clear way of signaling I am somebody who has monetary wealth more than other types of wealth.
So let's say you go out, right? If you see somebody else driving a car that shows wealth, what does that say about you?
And it's such an individual thing, right? Like you can have an expensive car and also not need to, the status that comes with it. You might be somebody who loves the status that come with it, or you might be somebody who loves cars and you just like driving a really nice, fast car. That might be your thing.
Really, the only way to know where you would stand on a hierarchy is to compare yourself to others. That's the only way you would ever know, because otherwise there is no ladder if there's only one person. And like you said, like some of the ways to measure status are, maybe it's goods. Maybe you can wear an expensive clothing or an expensive article of clothing. I'm sure that dates back thousands of years, back in Rome or whatever. So I'm sure the wealthier, higher class people wore like robes and gowns and silks and whatever that most people couldn't get their hands on.
Yeah, the types of dye that were the hardest to come by were the most expensive. So if you saw somebody wearing a robe that was dyed a certain color, you knew they were wealthy.
Yeah. So I think it's just interesting to kind of tie it back into the idea that, it really is all a story that you tell yourself. And a lot of the reasons that people care about money, the question is, why do you care about money? Like, is it because you're comparing yourself to the people around you, or maybe you do really just care about driving a fast car, or maybe you like the idea of the way people would perceive you when you drive that fast car. I think that it does matter, like how the individual person feels. But I would say that most people who like deeply care about money, on some level, it's a status game. It's a comparison game. I think a lot of life in general is just a comparison game.
I think there's a lot of different things here. I think of the quote I heard, I don't know who said it originally, but once your basic needs are met, everything else is just a story. So, we talk about acquiring wealth or how wealth comes to us. Some people, I think about Derek Sivers, who built this business, had no interest in making money. He just enjoyed building the business, acquired all this wealth and doesn't really have much of an interest in the status that comes along with it. He's more interested in the experiences that come along with it. Somebody else that might have different motivations. There might be motivated to make money for the sheer joy or the sheer feeling of just feeling like they have a lot of money, or the status that comes along with that. So I think your intentions right at the onset of your journey, whatever that might be, are you somebody who wants to make a lot of money? Are you someone who is comfortable making enough money to make ends meet? What level of security do you need? For some people, they might feel comfortable with $100 million in the bank. Like that might not be enough for them, where for somebody else, $100 might be enough in the bank. So I think there's a lot of different levels here.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you brought up Derek Sivers. For those of you who don't know, Derek Sivers is the founder of cdbaby.com, and he sold his company for like 17 million. He just gave it all away to a trust for charity. So he didn't actually take any of the money, and he lived on $500 a month in New York City for a long time. And his whole thing was, like how you said, it matters like why you start the journey in the first place. I think that definitely matters. What are your intentions in the first place? And that's one of Derek Sivers' questions. Why do you want it in the first place? I think that's a question that everybody needs to ask themselves. Why do you actually want the money?
Yeah, I think when you ask the question, why do you want it in the first place? That immediately reminds me of our first podcast episode where we started this journey with values, goal setting, having a really clear destination of where you want to go in life. So whenever you talk about acquiring money, acquiring wealth, acquiring whatever else, you want to prioritize, you want to revisit as often as you can your values, have a clear idea of why you're making the decisions you're making. And if you can use that as a compass, I think a lot of these discussions or a lot of these decisions become a lot clearer right away.
I totally agree with you. I think clarity just changes the game. At Eagle Lab, we're huge about clarity because once you know what you want, it just, all the decisions have a clear binary answer. It's like yes or no. It's much easier to make decisions when you know exactly what you want. And I think there's a tendency in society for people to not, there's kind of a little bit of vagueness in what people want. They're not exactly sure. And because society is so, it functions around money, people just assume that more money will solve their problems. So they just think that what they need is more money, and then all of the other problems will go away. But that's not always true.
Yeah, I think about the idea of I'll be happy when, we hear like, oh, I'll be happy when I get that new job. I'll be happy when I have more money. I'll be happy when I find the right relationship. But the reality is a lot of happiness in life, in my experience, just comes down to working on myself and making sure that I'm doing what I need to do to make sure I'm taking care of my needs and vocalizing things and just making sure that not in a selfish way, but just in a way that I'm not relying on external factors for my happiness. It's coming in from just appreciating what I have, being grateful, focusing on the relationships that I have, things like that.
More, 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 more. That reminds me of Thoreau. He says that man is the richest whose pleasures are the cheapest.
Great man, that Thoreau.
That Thoreau, he's great. I loved his book. It's true in a lot of aspects. If you even just think about the everyday actions in your life, I think just finding the simple moments, just enjoying the times that you spend with your family and your friends. Well, yeah, maybe sometimes money is a tool or a conduit to like have some experiences, like going out to restaurants. That's a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, I think it's just like enjoying being around the people that you care about, which costs nothing. Which costs nothing.
Yeah, I always think about this one experience anytime I get caught up on wanting to make more money or build anything that build an empire, anything like that. I think about this family I saw one time when I was kayaking, and they're just barbecuing on the beach. They brought a grill, they brought some food, and they brought their family. That was it. And they were the happiest people I think I had seen in like so long. They were just smiles everywhere, having a great time, and literally nothing complicated about their day. Just grilling out, hanging out, enjoying each other's company. And it always helps me reframe, what do I want to see happen in my life? And I think about that family. What else do you need?
That's amazing. How much do you think a grill costs, Brian?
You can find grills. You can go to the beach and there are grills there. You just need some charcoal, or you just need some wood, almost basically free.
Yeah, it's basically free. That reminds me of a story. Me and a couple friends, my best friend Joe, I think my brother Nico, we were on the beach, drive on beach, and these couple of like older guys, they walked down and they were clear, like one guy was like a owner of a law firm and the other guy was, I don't know, they had a good amount of money, But they came and they started talking. They were wasted, by the way. They came and they were talking to us, and and they were like, "Oh, this is it, guys. Like, only if I had known when I was your age that really all it takes to be happy is like you're living it right now. Like to be young again and to be just driving out onto the beach and just hanging out with your friends. Like that's all it takes, and it costs nothing. It's free. So
Yeah, I think it's so easy to lose sight of the simple things in life because just to bring it back to that point, right? It's like within our genetic code that it's hard to get away from that piece of status and that piece of hierarchy, and feeling like the moment you start comparing yourself to other people, the moment you start getting away from that simple pleasure, right? Like the moment you put yourself above anybody or below anybody, which is an interesting thing that, I had seen something somewhere a while ago, which kind of shaped my whole life, which is like, don't ever, look down at anybody because that's a bad thing. But it's also like, you got to be careful who you look up to, because if you're always looking up to somebody who has more money or more fame or, whatever you want to use as that metric, that's dangerous too.
that is so true. You're so right. And I can attest to this personally. When I was building my startup, I definitely went through that. I experienced like feeling I felt like I was like on top of the world, you know? Like I was like I'm working so hard. I'm working 24 hours a day. And I did. I kind of looked down on other people a little bit. I was like what are these people doing? Like they're not out there like working so hard for like this money and these dreams. And I think a lot of that has to do with just who you start looking up to and the ideas that you surround yourself, the people that you surround yourself with. And a lot of these like uber successful people that a lot of people look up to, they just work like 24 hours a day. Like they don't have any semblance of balance. And maybe that is truly what they enjoy, but I think the problem lies in the fact that most people aren't built like that. And if that's the standard that people are comparing themselves to because they're on the cover of magazines and like they only see the end part of like whoever it may be, like Elon Musk or Airbnb co-founders cashing out for like billions of dollars, successful startup sale or whatever, they don't see the whole journey of like 20 years of 24-hour work and all the sacrifices that come along with that. You end up usually pinning yourself to some standard that is just unrealistic.
Yeah, there's a tremendous book by the great Robert Sapolsky, who's a Stanford professor, who spent his entire life studying monkeys and traveling to countries and places, studies them in the wild, and then goes back and teaches at Stanford for the rest of the year. But he writes this book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which basically talks about we're the only animals that can have conversations in our head to the level at which we can. So a zebra, out on the plains doesn't sit around worrying about lions chasing them all day. If they get chased by a lion, they run, and then their hormones and all the chemicals in their body that are associated with fear go away and they go back to their life as normal if they survive the interaction. Humans are the only ones that can sit around and dwell on all the challenges and all the stories and all the comparisons. We're the only animals that have that experience. It's really interesting.
Totally agree, and it's really fascinating how much control and like how much I guess plasticity there is in our brain. Like the way that we think, we just create these neural pathways in our mind, and the more we think a certain way, the more we strengthen those connections. And I think that goes for just like comparison and money too. If you have a certain way that you think about money or a certain way that you think about success, you can get these ideas ingrained in yourself just by the nature of being human. Like you said, like a zebra will just go right back to the way it was, but humans, they can just like completely change their trajectory by just one bad idea or just one bad belief, I guess.
Yeah, it's the mental technology you want to call it, maybe that allows us to plan, right? Like if you want to build shelter, it's a very useful skill, but the moment it stops being useful, it has the potential to go the other way.
Yeah, which makes me wonder what are some of the emotions that people have towards money and why?
For the listeners, I think it's important to reflect what's your relationship to power and status and money. And, it's important to always evaluate, are you pursuing money as a resource to pay the bills and to, maybe make the world a better place, or are you pursuing it for other alternatives? There's nobody sitting here saying there's a right or wrong way to live your life. It's just important that you're living in line with what you want to see happen.
I love that. Always tying it back into the values is just an incredible thing to do. And I've heard that, you know, a lot of people say when people get rich and they make a lot of money, oftentimes it tends to be kind of just like an amplifier of who you already are. So if you have a person who's kind of greedy and angry and indulgent, having more money will usually just exacerbate those qualities. And if you have someone who's generous and whatever, insert value or or characteristic, money will just expound that. So that's something to really consider. If you're pursuing money and you haven't gotten your core like person in check yet, you haven't done the reflection and the deep personal work, then it could come with some consequences.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's important to mention here too that, as people having this discussion, we want to be respectful that everyone is coming to this at a different place. There are people out there who may not be able to pay the bills and their story might be completely different. Think about like what you need to be happy, like what are the things that you want to see happen in your journey, and just make sure that you're not, using that comparison piece. You're not comparing yourself.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's definitely an important thing to mention. With all that being said, we can kind of run a little exercise on how you would be, or at least how you think you would be, if you were in that situation where you did have the money that you want. Because I think it's kind of interesting that a lot of people, everybody would want to be a millionaire, right? Like everybody wants to win the lotto, to just have all this money magically fall upon them. But think about it. What would you actually do? If you had $10 million, what would you do? What would you have? What items would you have? And who would you be? These are important questions to reflect upon because a lot of times people don't know. I don't think I would know. And that really begs the question, if you don't even know why you want the money, then why do you want the money?
You brought up a really interesting point. I'm going to try not to take this on too far of a tangent, but lottery winners. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of lottery winners and how that typically goes. People who win millions of dollars typically are less happy after they win the money because they generally don't have the skills to manage the money and wind up spending it on a million different things as much as they can, as fast as they can. And then they go back and it's difficult for them to live the simple life because they've had all these experiences of indulging themselves, and as fast as they and hard as they could. And then they go back to, their life before, and it just shifts their whole perspective.
That's very interesting. I'm not sure where I read this. I believe it was Dopamine Nation, the book. And they talk about, or the author talks about how people who were like adrenaline junkies, people who did like extreme stunts, like skydiving and stuff like that, they actually, only if they did it like repeatedly, they actually like desensitize themselves to like enjoying the little things. And I think you see that in a lot of different areas of when you go overboard in a certain area, you can actually desensitize yourself. And I think that may actually also be able to be applied to lottery winners. They desensitize themselves when they are getting these constant dopamine rushes of spending all this money, and then once they fall down to zero, or maybe not zero, they can't really experience things the way they wish they could, or just accept that they had enough.
Yeah, I love that point.
Which brings up the story of one time there was this billionaire party on Shelter Island thrown by Kurt Vonnegut, and he informs his pal Joseph Heller that their host is a hedge fund manager, had made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his wildly popular novel Catch 22 over its whole history. And Heller responds, "Yes, that's true, but I have something that he will never have. Enough."
What do you think? if you could dwindle it down to, the simplest level, how does somebody get to that enough?
Simplest level. I can
Yeah,
I
like
can
the most
I
basic level.
I can break it down to one word,
Go ahead.
and I'll give you one guess at that word, Brian.
Is it values?
You're close. I think it's gratitude.
Hmm.
I think it's gratitude. I think just being appreciative of what you have. It's as simple as that. And I think that's exactly the point, if you're and you brought this up. If you're constantly pursuing more and when I get this, I will be. I think that is like the enemy. Like if you say when I get this, I will be versus just looking at the things that you can already be grateful for, that's it.
Yeah, the term for that, the hedonic treadmill, hedonism, always pursuing pleasure for the sake of pleasure. And there's nothing wrong with, pursuing things that make you feel good. It's just about like balancing that with the gratitude and patience and acceptance and all the other things that come along with the pleasure piece or the joy, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't always have to be that constant pursuit of things that make you happy.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And when you mentioned treadmill here, you immediately bring me to the rat race, or at least that's what I think of. We've been talking about money this whole time, and I just want to make a distinction. What's the difference between wealth and money, Brian?
Yeah. So basically, wealth it's more of a comprehensive piece of acquiring money, right? It's being able to afford experiences, being able to feel secure. When you build wealth, you become able to do more things and feel more comfortable that you have enough.
Yes,
Theoretically.
I can definitely expand on this. I had a conversation with one of my best friends yesterday, and she kept saying, I don't know if my current career path is going to be good for me because I don't know if I'm going to have enough money to like
Mm.
sustain myself in New York. And so she's considering switching career paths to something where she can make like 20, 30 grand more a year. That kind of shows how like wealth really is the ability to feel comfortable. And when I kept asking her questions like why, just kind of try to understand why this was so important to her, it really came down to the fact that she was comfortable. She wanted to make sure that she had enough, that she was comfortable and that she could provide for, buy a house in the future and provide for her family in the future. And so I think wealth is when you have enough. As far as money goes, wealth is when you have enough money.
Yeah, for everybody that's different, right?
So yeah, it's really just it depends on your definition. But if we go into the practical how to build wealth, it's a very different question. But I think obviously wealth is created by owning assets. The more things that you own and the more assets that you own, you have now an income stream, which gives you more options and more opportunities. Yeah, as Chris Rock would say, wealth is not about having a lot of money, it's about having a lot of options. Very timely quote there. I wonder if there's a Will Smith quote on money.
Oh, geez, it's not even. Yeah, no, it's interesting. We think about building wealth and what that looks like, and we live in the tri-state area, New York and Connecticut here, and what we need to get by financially might look a lot different than somebody who lives in another country or a different part of our country, right? Like what we need to make to get by is completely different, and that's not neither a good or bad thing. It's just the reality of the situation.
I'm sorry, I just looked this up here. Will Smith quote on money. They're actually accrediting this one to him. Money and success don't change people; they merely amplify what is already there. So
There
I
you go.
guess
Boom. You already quoted him before.
we've got Will Smith and Chris Rock in this episode. By the way, we created this outline before we ever knew about this Will Smith Chris Rock incident, but I find that pretty funny.
Yeah, best of luck to both of them. Nothing but good vibes going their way from us. We wish them nothing but the best.
Shout out Chris Rock if you're listening right now.
What's fascinating about wealth? When you were talking before, this thought popped into my head. I had heard a story at one point. I think I read it in a book. It might have been a Mark Manson book. Anyway, as the story goes, there's a billionaire who's worth, it's whatever the number was, 10 billion, and lost $1 billion of his wealth and dropped so many, points down, so many spots down the list of the wealthiest people in the world, and wound up committing suicide. And, here there are stories of, similar things of people who lose status, lose wealth, things like that, or, money, whatever it might be. And then, yeah, unfortunately do things like take their own life or whatever else comes along with that, those destructive behaviors. And it's just interesting that it's sad that somebody could achieve that level of success financially, if that's how you're measuring, if that's one of the ways you want to measure success, and then lose it all or take their life for that.
Yeah, yeah, it's terrible. And that really comes down to like everything just depends on how you define it. Like it's really all just stories in our head. Why would somebody take their own life because they lost $1 billion? Here we just defined wealth as it's not about having a lot of money, it's about having a lot of options. That guy who was worth 9 billion, he had all the options in the world. You don't
Yeah, he had
need
some options. Yeah.
he had some options. You don't need more than like $5 million to like have plenty of options. And it's because the only thing I can presume is that because he identified his value as how much money he had.
Yeah. His status. Yeah.
His maybe his money or his ranking, his status, something there. And I'm wondering how many people out there have a similar kind of definition of money or success or happiness.
Yeah, Tony Robbins talks about his relationship with money a lot in his books and his talks. And he has this really interesting series of questions that he asks people, when they come see him and say, I want to make enough money to do all this stuff. And he's like, okay, like what? Well, I want to have enough money to have a private plane and a private island and have, all this stuff. And he, he's like, why do you want to own a private island? It's, a lot of work. It's something you have to manage. You have to worry about paying the bills on it. You have to worry about taking care of it. When stuff goes wrong, you have to manage it. I didn't want a private plane. You have to worry about keeping it somewhere. You have to worry about making sure it's constantly updated, having a pilot for it, all these things. And he's like, wouldn't it be better to make 1% of what you want to make and just have those experiences and be able to travel to a private island for, a weekend or, whatever it might be that you're really passionate about doing. If you could just reframe all those things and have the experiences without the status, like, wouldn't that be so much better? And he's always, he says, everybody always says, yeah, that sounds way better.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. The quote is money is a horrible great servant but a horrible master, right? So like when people have a lot, there's a lot of responsibilities that come with that. Even just something simple like owning a home. Like owning a home has a lot of responsibilities that come along with it versus renting. And I think a lot of the times the experiences that people want or associate with a lot of money, like owning a private jet or a private island, it really doesn't cost as much as people think it does to do those things. And that's why there's a few books out there. I think a Ramit Sethi book and also this other book Vagabonding. They kind of talk about this a little bit. Like you can live the life that you want to live for significantly less money than you would suspect. And so it's so important to go out there and just start writing down what your dream life really looks like. Like, what do you really want to do? And then find a way to do it. And look, it's not actually, you have to make sacrifices. There's always sacrifices. So sometimes it comes down to just choosing what's the most important things for you and then focusing your money on those. Like sometimes, like if you're spending a few $100s a week at restaurants, and that's the most important thing to you, so be it. Maybe cut back a couple $100s on rent. If you want to go out to a 5-star restaurant 2 times a week, and that's what makes you feel wealthy and makes you feel happy, then go for it. But you got to sacrifice somewhere else. And that's totally okay. Just choose the things that make you feel the most wealthy.
For sure. Yeah. I think what's amazing about, the information age that we're living through is there's access to so much information, which can be, lead to paralysis by analysis, overthinking things and having so many opportunities. You're not sure exactly where to go. But at the end of the day, if you get clear on those values and what you want to see happen, then you can find specific tools to help you achieve that. You can find these books, you can find talks, you can find, watch YouTube videos, whatever it might be. There's tremendous resources out there now. And when you know where you want to go, you can find clear ways and create clear ways and plans to get there.
That's exactly right. Work backwards. Clarity, clarity, clarity. Work backwards. Once you know what you have, find a way to get it. It's so much easier to solve a problem that when you know what the destination is. So if you want to go on a vacation once a month, then it's doable. It's doable. Even on a regular salary. But you got me thinking now, Brian. What does the science actually say about money and happiness?
There's so much research that's being done now across this domain, and it's really interesting to see kind of how it's changed through the years. At first, there was a thought like once your basic needs are met, you can't get any happier. There's no way. Once you make the numbers for the U.S. about $80,000 on average, just throwing out the general number in these studies. Once you make above $80,000, you don't get any happier. Well, there's new research that's suggesting, well, that might not be possible, or that might not be the case. It might be that the more money you make, there is a plateau. But when you have access to more things, more opportunities to be more successful, groups, vacations, all these things, house, cars, you don't have worries. That's one of the biggest things, when you can pay the bills for more than just week to week, you get happier. It's not just about meeting the basic needs week to week. It's about the being able to know you can meet them down the road. And then there is kind of a curve on it where it does level off. There's no answer, so to speak, right now on where that top is. But yeah, there is a little bit of it isn't exponential, but you do get happier as you make more money.
I, not to sound arrogant here, but I disagree with that to a certain extent. I agree, but I also disagree. I think, yes, on one condition can you be happier with more money, and that is that you have the right frameworks in place. I think for a large amount of people, if you have the wrong frameworks in place, more money won't change anything. For
Yeah.
example, if you own more stuff, a lot of times that can come with more headaches and more problems. If you have the right systems in place where with the more money you get, the more things you outsource, the more you take more problems off your plate with more money, then yes, now you have more options. I think there's a direct correlation to options rather than maybe particularly wealth or money. Because
Yes.
some people may make a lot more money and they end up just buying a bigger house. They end up buying more cars. And these are more liabilities rather than actually freedom. Like what may appear to be a better life actually may not be and actually probably isn't from my opinion. I think a lot of times just materialistic things actually don't bring that much more love, more happiness, but more options do.
The research is inconclusive for what you just mentioned. There is no great way to evaluate, large groups of people by income. You made some great points about if you make 10 million but spend 10 million, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a lot of security. It can mean you're actually more insecure because, if you lose your job, it might be tougher to replace $10 million dollars than it is to replace $80,000. The two pieces, these researchers, my understanding is security and options, right? If you make more, you can theoretically save more, but for sure it doesn't mean that just because you make more money you are happier. For sure, that's not the case.
That's a great point. And I want to bring up a point here. I think if I was listening to this, I might say, hey, these are all great ideas, great fundamentals. It's great to kind of change the way that we think about money. But hey, I live in an expensive city, and I need to make 70K, 100K, 150K to actually just afford my rent and to live. And I think it's important to think creatively about what you want. Don't pigeonhole yourself. Draw out some ideas, draw out some plans, think outside the box. It's an experiment. It's your life, and you should play with the variables as much as you can. Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't even need to live in that expensive city, and you could still get that salary. Maybe there's a way to work a remote job, or maybe you can take a few months off and travel and live in hostels, like I learned about in vagabonding. There's ways to kind of move the figures around and change how much money you might actually need. So play with those variables and figure out, just test it out, guess and check what actually makes you happy. Where can you get the most value and joy for the money that you spend?
Yeah, I mean, I think about kind of the personalities of the places, that you can live. And we'll talk about America here because it's where we are. And you think about like the personalities of living like either in the city or around New York City versus like the type of culture, the climate, the personality climate of living somewhere, maybe more south or maybe more west. I think about California as kind of like that more relaxed vibe. I was out in Colorado a couple years ago, and it just like everything felt a little bit more slower and relaxed, which might be something you like. Wow, this is like my spot. I love it. It's slower. Or you might be somebody who's like, I would never want to live somewhere in like a slower pace. I need the fast pace. That's what I really enjoy and thrive in. So it's kind of like you got to pick kind of these things as they relate to you or as you want to see them happen. But the choices are out there.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of my friend, she said she doesn't want to leave New York. She never wants to leave New York. And obviously we all know New York is one of the most expensive places to live. So if that's one of the variables that are stuck, you gotta be creative. It's not easy. It's not going to be easy. Just making a living is very difficult. It's going to be a challenge, but I think just getting the right systems and frameworks and figuring out where you can get the most value, that's all it takes to completely just change your life. You could feel like a millionaire. What will make you feel like a millionaire?
It's a great question. I like that one.
Actually, yeah, I stole that from Ramit Sethi, but he says like, what's one thing that you would do if you were a millionaire? Mine, I think, is I would first of all I would always have like the newest iPhone. Maybe I think I would have if I could afford the newest iPhone and use an iPhone with no case, because I think an iPhone with no case is just a beautiful. It's a piece of art, and I would love to just it feels so sleek, and I think that would be like one of my millionaire things, just iPhone no case.
A new iPhone with no case. That's living right there.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. What would yours be, Brian?
If I had $1 million, I think about this all the time. I would want to live pretty simple, like maybe buy a like small little piece of land, a small little farm. Maybe do like have a rescue farm for animals, that kind of thing. That would make me quite happy.
There you go. And for the listeners out there, think about like what's one thing that would make you feel like a millionaire. And maybe it is realistic to actually fit that into your budget if you just sacrifice somewhere else.
Tony, I think there's a really good experiment we can do here to kind of bring it all home. Let's take a moment to think, what is one thing you've acquired recently that either costs no money or less than $20 that has brought you joy? Something that's simple and brought you a lot of joy.
For me, this is easy actually because I have a problem. I'm addicted to books. I just keep buying them, and every book I read, I'm like, wow, this was so worth it. I get so much joy out of books. So, and I buy so many, and they're almost all of them are under $20 because I use thrift books. Hashtag not sponsored. Thrift books, if you're listening, please sponsor us. Yeah, thrift books, buying books, definitely.
Love it.
What about you, Brian?
What's the one book you bought? I want to know. What's that one book that you loved?
One book that I loved. Oh, right now I have not gotten very far through it, but I think it's like the willpower instinct, and I'm so fascinated by this concept. I think I already got like one question out of it from somewhere. Just I think it was a podcast episode. Somebody talked about it, and the question is, it's like, what do you want, and then what do you really want? Like, let's say there's a donut in front of you. This is very timely because I just went to Duck Donuts and devoured like two donuts. But if there's a donut,
The flavors.
I got Beach Ball, which is basically just a plain donut with vanilla, rainbow sprinkles, and then chocolate drizzle on top. And then I got just like a plain donut with chocolate and rainbow sprinkles. Amazing, so good. They come out hot and fresh. Amazing. If you let's say you're sitting in front of these two amazing donuts, you could say, I really want to eat these donuts because they're delicious. Before you eat them, you think, but what do I really want? And what you really want might be to be fit, to lose some weight, to have a nice body. So you shift from that like immediate short-term gratification to that long-term. And so that's just one question, one little framework, and it's been like popping up, ringing in my head every time I'm like making a decision. So I'm excited to uncover all of the little gems in there that can just be frameworks to get that iron willpower because that changes everything.
Interesting. So you're reading a book about what do I really want? And you're like, I really want those donuts.
Yeah, exactly. That beach
Love it.
ball.
All right. I'm gonna go, for my thing, I'm gonna go, it's springtime here, and one of my passions is gardening. So I just bought some vegetable seeds, and sunflower seeds are starting to pop up. It's like such a joy just to see kind of new growth and renewal. Couple bucks, and I'm loving it.
Yeah, those flowers are starting to come in. It's beautiful out here. Okay, that's great. If you have something that you come up with, please let us know. Tell us what you bought for under $10 that brought you some joy. Maybe Brian and I will jump on that train and let you know what we think about some of the things you bought. You can find us on all social at Ego Lab Podcast, but please, we mainly use Twitter. So we would love to see you reach out on Twitter
Send us an email.
at Ego Lab Podcast. EgoLabPodcast at gmail.com. Please reach out. We want to hear from you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. If you made it this far, we love you. Can't wait to see you in the next episode. Before you go, make sure to check out our top book recommendations, guided worksheets, and reflective questions on egolab.us. You can also find us on all social at EgoLab Podcast. We encourage you to reach out and join the conversation. If you find some value in any of these resources that we spent hours building for you, a 5-star review for this podcast would be much appreciated. See you all on the next one.